it's really hard to get away from talking about Mercury retrograde. So give us your thoughts on Mercury retrograde.
I'll do a brief little description of the astronomy around Mercury retrograde. So if you imagine, like, here's the sun, right? Here's Mercury, and here's Earth, right? And Venus is somewhere in between. So you have Mercury is kind of going around, it makes roughly, I think, 3 or 4 orbits, and I think it orbits the sun roughly 4 times that Earth orbits once. But when it appears to be going retrograde, so if you imagine the Earth is out here moving this way, that means the sun appears to be going this way. And so when Mercury is anywhere from about right here to about right here, it appears that Mercury is moving in the same direction as the sun. It's when, if Earth was over here, it's in between the Earth and the sun. The sun appears to be going this way, and Mercury appears to be going opposite, in the opposite direction. So that's what's going on out in the solar system. So when Mercury goes retrograde, it's moved into that space in between the Earth and the sun. So this happens typically 3 times a year for roughly 3 weeks. And then if you extend it to include the period where it slows down right before it turns retrograde, and then I think it's referred to as its shadow period, is after it turns direct before it crosses back over the degree where it went retrograde, would also be kind of the energy of Mercury retrograde. What I've found, just by observing the events in my life and in the world that I'm aware of, is that it's a time where the energy shifts. So I personally do not agree with this idea that you shouldn't sign a contract or you shouldn't make any sort of an important decision. In fact, it may be a better time for some people to make an important decision. What I've noticed is that people will think differently in this period. Maybe they'll revisit something that they had set down, particularly if the Mercury retrograde lines up with something in their chart. It does appear that sometimes there's some kind of wonkiness with communication or technology, though that's not consistent. Sometimes that seems to happen and sometimes it doesn't. So it's like certain Mercury retrogrades, you see all of the kind of classic, technologies getting weird, or, kind of little screwy things with communication, people calling out, or forgetting to do something. And then sometimes none of that happens. And then sometimes there's periods where Mercury's not retrograde, where that type of stuff seems to be happening kind of all over the place. So I don't understand why I haven't figured that out yet. But what I would say is it's a shift in energy. So typically it would be a shift in what people are thinking about, what people are focusing on, what people are talking about. So perhaps there may be communication is different, which may be a good thing. It may be helpful. And it may help somebody to complete something if they've kind of, if you're the type of person who's inclined to procrastinate or not finish things, maybe a Mercury retrograde will give you that shift in energy to kind of be like, oh, what about that thing? And then pick it back up. So it's really just, it's a shift in energy. It's where that energy of how we think and communicate is different.
And that's probably a good thing for, as people are learning astrology, is to just try and pay attention to how you feel during Mercury retrograde. And that brings up my next question. which is when you're looking at your Mercury in your chart, if you do see that little R next to your Mercury, there's so much interpretation of what that means. And my son has Mercury retrograde, which is not unusual. About 20% of people do, because it does retrograde, like you said, for about 3 weeks, 3 to 4 times a year.
Yeah.
So it's not
9
unusual.
Out of 52 weeks a year or something like that. Yeah.
So it's not unusual to see that R next to Mercury on your birth chart. And what I've read typically, which I don't agree with, and I would definitely caution people to think critically about it, is that if you see that, typically you'll have trouble learning. If you have Mercury retrograde in your chart, you may have had learning disabilities or trouble learning to read, or that's a very literal interpretation. And I don't know if you have any. I know you don't like to make general interpretations on things like this, but
I have a lot to say about that.
Just as kind of what if somebody does see an R next to the Mercury in their chart, how would you, I guess, tell them to start to think about that?
Yeah, so I have Mercury retrograde in my chart. What I would say about any of these and what I'm going to be teaching, I will be deliberately vague. And the reason for that is it could mean many different things. So if you were to look at all the Mercury retrograde people out there in the world and compare them to all the people who are not Mercury retrograde, perhaps you would see that a higher percentage of people with Mercury retrograde have difficulty learning. Perhaps not. I think a lot of astrologers, they have theories and they state their theories as if they're facts, maybe because they've had 1 or 2 or a handful of cases which validate their theories. And then I suspect that they forget all the cases that don't validate their theories. So in regards to Mercury retrograde in the birth chart, what I would expect to be most common is that the person perhaps just thinks and communicates differently than what is considered typical. Perhaps they're an outside the box thinker. Perhaps they're maybe a little quiet, or perhaps they're a little outspoken. I would expect people to just have kind of a different way of doing things or a different way of thinking about things and communicating. And I would say that's true of me. Perhaps in some cases, I would say a person may be a little more deliberate in how they think. If you think about the energy, when a planet's moving direct, so now it's gone retrograde, it almost kind of slows the energy down, perhaps. Though this is something to just think about. So, like I was saying, you got all the charts of everybody that you know well. It's unlikely that there won't be at least 1 or 2 people who have Mercury retrograde in their chart. Roughly 15 to 20% of the population has Mercury retrograde in their chart. So if you get enough charts, most people can get 10 to 20 charts. If you really go like parents, children, siblings, significant other, close friends, coworkers, you typically find 10 to 20 charts. And so there's a good chance that at least a couple of them are going to have Mercury retrograde, if not more. And so just think about how does that person think and communicate? And is it any different than everybody else? That's a good place to start as far as like your journey of learning astrology. And that's how I really want to encourage people to go about learning is you take this basic information, which I'm presenting in a way that gives you a general framework, but is also vague. It's vague enough to where you can fill in the meaning based on what you actually see with the people in your life and continue to build on that as you get more and more charts to look at.